This is Jeff Mucci with RCR Wireless News. Thank you for joining us this month at our RCRatx Studio Lounge. We're going to be talking about how one of the world's fastest growing cities actually deals with a 3.2 unemployment rate. So how the city's dealing with funding future companies and addressing the workforce pipeline. Today our guests are Julie Huls, who's CEO of the Austin Technology Council, and Lynn Atchison, who's CFO of Homeaway. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So we're going to take a look at two reports that the ATC put together, Austin Technology Council. One is on tech talent study, and the second one really looks at the capital landscape here in Austin. And in one of those reports, it talks about Austin truly being unique in the global technology community. So why don't we start off, Julie, what makes Austin unique in the tech community?
Many things. I think first and foremost, people love to live in Austin, right? We have really a very attractive lifestyle, very outdoors oriented. We're still affordable. I know that that's changing very quickly in this market, and I know that I'll have a lot of people who disagree with me, but compared to other major metropolitan areas around the world, we're still very, very affordable. I think we have also, clearly Texas is actually known for having a very favorable business tax structure. So we have a lot of companies that are coming in from California and other places around the world. And I think we also have sort of this cool factor, frankly, that's been really developed over the last 30 to 40 years. We have, South by Southwest, and we have F1 and a lot of cool things that people just like to come to our city for.
Yeah. And Lynn, you've been with Homeaway since inception?
Close to it for 9.5 years.
So that was one of a big private equity backed deal, 45 to 50 million, consolidated a bunch of vacation sites. But organically, how many employees have you hired over the last decade?
So worldwide, we have about 2,000 employees, and we have really probably over 1,000 in Austin, Texas. So from the various when I joined, there were probably about 80 employees in Austin. So in 9.5 years, we've grown considerably.
Well, I think one of the things I love about Homeaway and others like Silicon Labs, you made an investment in locating the company downtown.
Yeah.
So right there at 6th Street and Lamar, 5th and Lamar, there's a big Homeaway presence. I got to ask this question though, what's the story behind the bird's nest up in the corner?
So actually our logo is the birdhouse.
Right.
And so that came from the very, very early days, and there's varying stories about why the birdhouse was developed, but it ties into us being you're home away from home when you go on vacation. It's a form of a house, and so that became our logo. So when we moved downtown, we really wanted something that would be dramatic. And it's a great space because it's a very large birdhouse that actually spans 2 floors, and we decorate it for Christmas and we decorate it for holidays. But inside, you can actually sit in the birdhouse, and so it's a great place to collaborate. And that is something with technology companies and employees. They want to be able to get together casually and collaborate. So it's a great spot. I
think it does speak to some degree to the unique factor of Austin and just the great tech vibe and tech community we have here in town. But I Julie, I want to go back to you and talk a little bit about some of the big wins or successes that Austin has had, either with organic growth or attracting other companies to come here.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone knows probably that we have a small handful of companies that have gone public recently, or companies that have been acquired, such as Homeaway, or they're at least in the middle of that process. Yep. But I think we also have had a very significant transformation as it relates to very large enterprise companies. For example, Visa and Under Armour, Athena Health, actually expanding their technical workforce in Austin. And I'll tell you, that transformation for the market in the last 45 years, and maybe even less if we did the math, has really changed our game. It's making our small to mid-market companies a little bit more competitive as it relates to tech talent and recruiting. And it's really, I think, also raised our global profile, frankly. The fact that we have Visa and Under Armour really investing very aggressively in our market as it relates to tech is really significant.
How have you seen the tech community evolve over the last 10 to 15 years? Maybe Lynn, you've been here since the early 90s. How's it evolved in your mind's eye? And then I'll share some experiences and Julie, jump in.
Sure. So yes, I've been in Austin for over 30 years and been working at technology companies since 1990. I think in the very early days, it was dominated by a few large players. The Dell Computer is a huge influence on our community, as was some of the early IBMs and TIs who moved to town and started hiring people out of the University of Texas. So I felt like it was dominated by larger players. When the entrepreneurial spirit really started hitting in the 90s, you had spin-offs from MCC, which was a large consortium here in Austin in the 80s. So that was spinning off smaller entrepreneurial companies, and I felt like that was the next wave, and software really started coming into place. Whereas the early days you had a lot more hardware focus, then it became software, and I think in the last 10 years you've seen just everything else.
Yeah. Julie, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I've been with ATC for 6 years, and I'll tell you there are probably 2 or 3 major categories. I think just from a branding perspective, the market really has evolved pretty significantly. I think 10 to 15 years ago, actually even 20 years ago, we obviously started with a really strong semiconductor base, and that was about all it was, right? Evolved into software clearly, and I know, again, up to about 5 to 10 years ago, we were almost completely identified by really being a great place for startups. And I think while we still remain obviously a very strong destination for startups and early stage entrepreneurs, we have this whole other part of our ecosystem that really is driving a lot of job creation within the innovation economy, thankfully. I think also just as a community, we've evolved quite a bit. I think it took us a while to kind of find, and I mean that sort of literally and formally, we went through a very comprehensive strategic planning process at ATC to really make sure that the companies who were, ranging from startup all the way to the Visas and the Under Armours really had, that we had a common vision and mission, right? So we've established 4 really important strategic priorities. Those were not set 5 to 10 years ago. And I think as a result, we're more organized. We have a long-range vision. We're very excited about a lot of new industries, life sciences being one of them, that we are really focused on together as a community. So I think we have a bright future, and we've made a lot of progress really in the last 5 to 10 years.
I think Austin has really shed its Silicon Hills moniker from probably 20 years ago. Even when I moved here in '99 to start a company, it was still referred to as Silicon Hills. But in that '99-2000 era, you really saw the growth of software, probably in the late '90s and early 2000 era, with the Tivoli being there, and then folks from Tivoli really spun off. Some folks that are now part of either BMC or SolarWinds or SpiceWorks, all of which are great, dynamic, kind of forward-leaning companies. But I know we've been we had a speaker series last month talking about IoT and industrial IoT, and we had National Instruments, who has their headquarters here in town. We had Gemalto, who has, I guess, one of their global offices here in town, and Paul Beverly's on your board.
Absolutely.
IBM was not a speaker, but they've got their Blue Mix IoT development area here, and then you've got Freescale, AMD, Samsung, Apple's building a campus here. 3M has their world headquarters for the wireless division here, so it's an incredibly diverse and deep base. But we're going to talk a bit more in a few minutes about the density of startups. I think Austin has been ranked as the #1 most dense city for startups. Any other examples you want to share with us of companies relocating here, and what were some of the primary drivers for them picking Austin over other markets?
Yeah, I don't know that I can name, frankly, a lot of the relocations.
Or opening other offices.
Yeah, I think the expansion theme is really significant. And I'll add maybe just also as part of the story about the market's evolution, 5 to 6 years ago, it was very prevalent for companies and really for just the community as a whole to have very strong Silicon Valley envy, right? And I'll tell you that is no longer the case. Very, we have very
shed our
firmly
inferiority complex.
No question. And it's not to say we clearly have a lot of things that we can and should continue to learn from other major tech markets, but I think Austin really has kind of come into its own in terms of a brand, and that really follows, I think, a national trend as it relates to secondary markets within, throughout the rest of the country. The Portlands and the Raleigh Durhams and the Austins are really sort of, getting more confident about what they have to bring to the table, and there are companies and relocations and expansions and entrepreneurs that are moving to these markets as a result.
Well, let's talk about the workforce pipeline theme. And the Austin Technology Council commissioned a tech talent study, which assessed the workforce pipeline in the Austin tech community. I'll give you a couple stats real quick on it. But last month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics pegged Austin with a 3.2 unemployment rate, and that compared to 3.8 in Silicon Valley. Austin employment as a whole, we're right at 1,018,000 compared to Silicon Valley has just a little bit more, 1,021,000. The tech sector represents 9% of all companies, 11% of all jobs, but 22%
Yes.
of the gross domestic product.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about why the ATC commissioned that report and what are you trying to do with that report?
Yeah, I think, strategically it's been really important to the organization and to the industry that we really begin to get a handle on the data, right? I think anecdotally, we've as a market been really fortunate to have evolved very organically in terms of our brand identity, but we didn't really know. We knew tech was important. We didn't really know to what degree, right? So the 22 billion is a number that we're very proud of. Obviously, we represent a very significant portion of the regional economy. We also needed to know, and after this year's very aggressive data collection efforts, we have a much better sense for how many jobs and which categories jobs those companies are recruiting in. We didn't know that before, which is also pretty remarkable. That data obviously allows us, along with major partners like the City of Austin, and to some degree even the state of Texas pays very close attention to what's happening here within its capital city, and really make frankly wiser decisions about economic development and planning. I think again, the market has been, lucky to kind of organically evolve, but moving forward, I think the industry and our other public partners have a very vested interest in planning very consciously and really, instead of planning a year or two in advance, looking at what we should be thinking about for the next decade and beyond.
And Lynn, you're vice chair of the Austin Technology Council, so maybe you could talk about when the report references scale, what has been one of the greatest challenges for Austin? What do they mean by that?
Well, one of the things we want to make sure we do is have talent here for our companies to grow. So in all of our discussions with tech leadership in the city, that always comes out with one of the top few things that they're worried about is how do I grow my business in Austin? So we want scale of qualified technologists to be able to meet the needs of growing businesses here in town so that those businesses don't feel like they've got to leave Austin in order to find additional employees. And one of the things I found was interesting in that report too was how you get skilled employees can really vary. I mean, it's not, it could be there's formal education, and it's how we work with the local school districts here. That's just one thing. There was another thing they talked about is how non-traditional forms of education are very, very important. I think in our conversation before we started the interview, you were talking about that this space is being used by a group that's doing some training in a certain type of coding. I think that is really something also that's very important. Tech talent is very broad. However you get there, we need plenty of people to fill the open positions in our companies. And so we'll be looking to formalize programs as well as non-traditional programs to meet the needs of the future.
And Julie, you said you quantified certain categories of jobs. What are some of the primary drivers of growth here in Austin in terms of job types and titles?
Yeah, the short answer obviously is software programming development, right?
Yeah.
Of the 26 or 28 categories that we tracked, about 45, almost 50% of those jobs were in development. So it's very clear what we need to be thinking about as a market. 45, actually a little more than 4,500 jobs were created by tech last year alone. And to really sort of reinforce Lynn's point, we are only graduating about 1,500 students with STEM degrees here in Central Texas. So I know that there's historically been some rubs about, tech companies going out of market to recruit, tech talent. And trust me, that is not their preference. Lynn can speak more to this than I can, but our companies are desperate, frankly, to recruit locally, but unfortunately the supply is not here. So we're going to have to get aggressive. I'd love to see our market really take the lead, even nationally, as it relates to workforce development. We're seeing some interesting things happening in other cities, and the fact, frankly, that the City of Austin is very vested in this effort is important. We have some good first steps, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to add that you mentioned the City of Austin. So a need for the industry is to get the technology-focused talent, and that's what we've been talking about. But as our businesses grow, we hire a lot of other type of employees too. We're hiring sales, we're hiring marketing, we're hiring customer experience. So a robust technology company isn't just in need of tech talent, they're in need of all talent.
Right.
And so I think that's good, and that's good for the economy. I think that's something that resonates with our city leaders, that not everyone is going to be a software programmer.
right.
But that doesn't mean that more and more people can't have opportunities at a technology-focused firm.
Great point.
I think one of the things that jumped out at me when looking through the report was the comparative analysis of Austin to 8 other markets around the country. When you
Yeah.
look at those stats, what do they tell you?
Yeah, so I think that we're looking now at the capital landscape analysis, and I'm happy that we're starting to benchmark against other markets, right? And I guess just to touch a little bit on that data, we know also that there's not just one category of capital. So I think the biggest headline, at least for us from an organizational perspective, is that we're not just talking about whether or not Austin has enough investment capital, right? We're looking at various categories, multiple categories that really span a continuum that ranges from angel funding all the way over to investment banks and PE funding, et cetera. The fact that we are starting to, look at and frankly compare ourselves to the likes of Chicago and Boston is nice. It provides some nice stretch goals for us, but frankly, it also provides insight into how some of the other secondary markets that we do traditionally compete with, the Raleighs and the Portlands, they're nipping at our heels, and they want what Austin has, right? We have a huge asset base as it relates to talent and other, livable city type assets. We have now the Dell Medical School. We have a lot of fantastic press. People love to live here. But frankly, Raleigh and Raleigh-Durham and Portland have some of the same assets. So I think it provides a great incentive for us, frankly, to continue to raise our game, to be globally competitive.
Well, let's jump back to the workforce pipeline. What are some of the specific things ATC is doing to really help employers close the skill gap?
Yeah, we have the City of Austin partnership. Frankly, is probably the single largest, strategic effort that we've undergone, and that's been a 2 to 3 year effort. It's taken a while, frankly, for those parties to get to know each other. We have some cultural differences, as you might imagine, between public and private industry. We certainly have some language challenges that we encountered, at least in the early days. We've really found, though, in the last 12 months or so, 12 to 18 months, a really nice rhythm with the city. Clearly, the city is investing tens of millions of dollars in workforce development efforts. They should be applauded for actually coming to industry to ask industry what they need. And we are very confident that over the next few years, we're going to really be able to redirect, frankly, some of the funding into programs like the coding academies, hopefully, that we know have been proven to be very effective, and also, frankly, shorten the pipeline development process. We know that not all companies require a 4-year degree in computer science, to Lynn's point. And so there are other, training and workforce development efforts that we can do, hopefully in partnership with the city, that really shorten that process and keep our companies growing at the rate that we need them to grow.
Well, I know one data point for your report was workforce data. The other was actually surveying companies, and there were a couple of things that jumped out as interesting to me. One, a great deal of emphasis on software developers, system analysts, and then particularly around programmers, they identified JavaScript as being one of the most demanded areas. You mentioned the Austin Coding Academy. They actually have been leasing our space from 6 to 9 o'clock Monday through Thursday, and they're running about 75 people through front end, back end, and advanced training classes here. So hopefully they're starting to fill the needs of companies for programmers, particularly not only user experience based but back end database folks, and those jobs don't necessarily require a college degree, which was one of the other points the report talked about. One other thing that was interesting in that report was the salary gap.
Yes.
Between this market and other markets. What are your thoughts on that salary gap?
Well, so I think the market has not quite yet caught up to the pressures. I think we're getting there. And it does sort of go back into the expansion point that we made earlier, right? The larger companies that are coming in from the East and West Coast are using their salary standards, right? And they're bringing those standards into Austin, and our homegrown companies are just starting to feel a bit of a pinch. The data, though, very clearly shows that we have a little bit of work to do as it relates to salaries, right, in terms of the tech workforce. I think we've been able, thankfully, to really lean very heavily on the affordability of the market and the fact that we have 140 people a day moving into our city. So those things are good, and we hope that our companies can continue to really leverage those strengths. But I think moving forward, as these larger enterprise companies continue to recruit aggressively. They are. I met this morning with Under Armour as one example. They hired more than 100 people this year alone. So and that's one company, right? We have almost 300 that are members of ATC. So as that competition continues to increase, I think we'll see our companies, have to start to meet higher standards. So I think we're okay for now, but I think the next 2 years will be game changing.
I think it's interesting when there've been magazines that always write about Austin being one of the great places to live, and recently magazines quoted us as attracting 3,000 people a month. The fact of the matter is our unemployment rate is still at 3.2% and dropping.
Yeah.
So the market is absorbing all the new people that come in, which is thankfully that's the case.
Right.
Otherwise, I think you would see a sharper spike in salaries.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump over and talk about the capital survey that you worked on, and maybe why did ATC commission that report and talk about the relationship with St. Ed's and David Altunian?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very proud to partner with St. Ed's University. They've been very strong, and we've really enjoyed the partnership. And we partnered with them not only on this study, but we have a tech talent initiative with the brand new internship program that we'll launch next year. So they've been very strong partners. Dr. David Altunian, who also is a board member of ATC and former executive at Motion Computing, he obviously has a lot of depth and expertise and experience in tech, and he's moved that expertise over to teaching at St. Ed's. And as a board member, I think, and as a board, frankly, collectively, we knew that we had a feeling that Austin needed to, frankly, improve its ecosystem, right, or improve the network effect as it relates to investment. We didn't, same story, different day, right? We didn't know in which categories. We had some anecdotal experience, and we certainly had some intuitive sense about where our strengths and weaknesses might lie. But this data really just points to the fact that we need, a much stronger network effect if we're going to continue to grow the likes of the Homeaways and really support the success of the Homeaways of Austin. We really have to start to focus on the Series B and later, the growth stage, and even some of the late stage, capital sources. That's something that, moving forward, we've been, again, very lucky to have organically grown a lot of strength within the seed and angel rounds, and to some degree even Series A investors. There's some strength here in that market. But after that, things start to get a little, I should say, more opportunistic, because we're very clearly inviting investors from out of market to come in and look at our companies.
Yeah. I think one of the items that jumped out at me was it pointed Austin as being the most dense city in terms of startups. So we got great startup entrepreneurial activity. Now, it's always been a problem here. The capital funding has always been a problem. But Lynn, maybe you can talk about Homeaway. I think it was unique in that Austin Ventures funded Homeaway and another company to the tune of 40 or 50 million 10 years ago. How did you end up funding your growth?
Right, so the early days, definitely Austin Ventures led those early rounds. There was another California venture capital, Red Point Ventures, who was always alongside Austin Ventures. So from that point, it was a combination of funding the business through growth and through profits, which is something that was always important to Homeaway in terms of having strong cash flow. And then we've actually, over 9.5 years, there's been all sorts of different things. We used bank funding during a period of time before bank funding really shut down. We used additional funding from existing partners. We moved into more of a later stage funding after the bust. In 2008, instead of going public, we decided to raise money with TCV, Technology Crossover Ventures, so we went to a different type of fund, and then of course we've accessed the public market. So we've really seen everything from the very early days of venture funding through banks, through PEs, through the capital markets.
Oh, the successes are here.
Yeah.
Again, you can point to SolarWinds, you can look at SpiceWorks, Bazaar Voice. What are some other success stories that you could point to, Julie?
Well, I'm going to probably embarrass Lynn, and she's obviously sitting right here, so we shouldn't speak of her as if she's not. But Homeaway is a shining example of the kind of company that we really need to continue to foster here in Austin. The fact that they have 1,000 employees alone in this market, 2,000 worldwide. They have, especially now, a worldwide reputation. They have very, locally committed leaders, and I know that sounds, probably a little too charming for some, but the fact that they're involved and they're leading the effort through organizations like ATC is really significant. We don't really necessarily see that in every market, right? Silicon Valley is one example. Doesn't necessarily have the the tight-knit community that Austin has. So the fact that we have a great example like Homeaway is fantastic, and we just need to multiply that case study.
Yeah.
So what specific, what does a roadmap look like for ATC in the city to fill that gap of the kind of level B funding to more traditional funding, whether it be senior debt or bank debt or IPOs? How do you close that gap?
So, well, I'll start by saying that the first step was just to identify it.
Yeah.
And I think to Julie's point that the tech community is just really in the last 5 or 6 years starting to see themselves as a tech community, as opposed to I work at this tech company A, I work at this tech company B, and a lot of the success of these technology companies over the last 10 or 20 years has really been because I work for A and I serve my customer.
Yeah.
I'm building a great product to sell to new customers. I've got blinders on in terms of what people are doing across the street from me or up Mopac or across the road. And so now the leadership in Austin is starting to, I call it kind of, look up and look around and appreciate each other and learn from each other. And I don't want to say we haven't been a collaborative tech community, but it's been collaborative in a different way. It's been one-on-one collaborative. I could call a CFO across town and say, I've got an issue or a problem, or let's go to have coffee and talk about it. It's been individually collaborative. Now we're seeing ourselves as the force that we are for economic economic force in Austin. And so I think seeing that was the first step in figuring out, okay, now we see it as a whole, look at examples of companies that perhaps have had those later rounds of funding, start to figure out how we make those connections. Homeaway has had those connections, so how does ATC help Homeaway help other companies? And so I think it was first identifying that the gap was there, not relying on intuition or your head in the sand, and then we can start figuring out the steps to bring that funding into town.
And I would encourage people, if you're not aware of this report, take a look at the report. It's available for download on the Austin Technology Council website. It goes into a great amount of detail, quantifying how many deals are done here versus 8 other markets around the country, the size of each deal, and incredibly analytical project. And again, I've been around for 16 years in Austin, and people always just said, well, Austin Ventures was the only capital group. Well, there's a lot of other guys, Silverton and just other folks. One thing that has always stood out in this market is overcoming the direct plane ride factor. I know we got more flights than we used to, but how does the city look to overcome that obstacle of not being a direct flight away?
That is maybe the hardest question of this interview, Jeff. I want to actually, in answering that question, also bring attention to the Greater Austin Chamber. They actually were a partner to ATC in this study, and David worked very closely with both the Chamber and ATC. So if you don't go to ATC's website, you can go to the Chamber's website and download the same data. And the Chamber has done such an amazing job. I think that this is, and frankly, through the years, the Chamber and ATC have had a lot of conversations about, okay, what is the difference? How do we really make the missions of these respective organizations very distinct, right? So the Chamber, I know, has done incredible work in that arena, and they've been a great partner on the capital study. And I think moving forward, to answer one of your earlier questions, we're excited to really, leverage, frankly, the strengths of ATC and to also leverage the strengths of the Chamber. The Chamber, through Opportunity Austin, as many people here locally know, spends millions of dollars on economic development efforts outside the market every year. So Michelle Skelding and I and both respective boards are looking forward to, frankly, putting this data in the hands of some of the investors that Michelle meets with every single day or every week, and hopefully really sending a very loud and very clear message that we're open for business, and our companies really need more access to growth in later stage capital.
Well, I think on the plane trip question, in 2000 we had a lot of direct flights in and out of town. It seems like they went away in the mid-2000s, and now actually they're back. I'm on the road quite a bit, and I'm able to book direct flights most everywhere I go, including internationally. So next week going to London, it's a direct flight, which is going to be
that's
great.
A great
so
flight.
I think what I've seen in terms of a market change in the past 7 to 8 years is just the number of high-quality investors that we do have here in town. I'll talk to Silverton and some others. So you've got more seasoned executives who are now making this home. So it's not just the, quote, billionaires who are funding angel deals. You've also got folks like Mike Maples and others who are just very senior executives that have made their life here, and they are willing to serve and mentor people. Any other folks that kind of come to mind about who are, and I'm sure Sharples will be supporting
well, I'm sure
the
he's going to
community.
be tapped on that. The other thing I was going to mention is, certainly the Austin airport is growing, and I was just there yesterday and parked in a parking garage I'd never parked in before. And but as we have more and more companies here, that's where you get the network effects. So 10 or 15 years ago, that plane ride was more daunting because maybe there was one company that VC could come down here and visit. Now maybe there are 10 or 15. And so even better, more people are setting up shop here, either moving in or they've been organically made money here in town through their investments, and so they're setting up shop. But also they can rationalize that plane trip. So even if it is a couple of stops along the way to get here from New York or Boston or California, from that standpoint, they've got more high quality prospects to visit.
Yeah, I think, and Live Oak, they've been very active. I met with Ben Scott a couple weeks ago, and he talked about looking at 600 plus deals over the past 18 months. So to your point, there's a lot more deal flow here in town to look at. You've got more groups to look at those deals, so you don't need to jump on a plane to come here. But I think a couple points, you've had a couple nice exits, or at least acquisitions. The Armor All bought a IoT wearable type company here in town. iControl was started here in town by Jim Johnson. They merged with U-Control, which was a Kleiner Perkins-based company, so they still have a strong base here in town. So those things didn't happen when I first moved here in 2000.
That's right.
Well, let's close by maybe giving us some insights about what you're most excited about over the next 12 months here in Austin.
I have a long list. I'll be succinct though. I'm very excited and frankly proud that Austin has come into its own. Right, we have more data about who we are and what we need to take it to the next level than we have ever had before in the market's history. So I'm very excited about that. I'm also very proud of the collective power, again, to reinforce one of Lynn's point, of not just the executive level, leaders within tech companies, but the tech community as a whole. I think for a while, because they were heads down, really making sure that their customers were served and they were growing their individual companies, there was almost a bit of a bad rap for tech in Austin, which is unfortunate. That's different, and we know, of course, that that's not the case, right? Our tech community has never been, they've always been committed to Austin, but I think this data and really this forward moving momentum and the vision that we have for our market for the next decade really is propelling a totally different level of engagement that frankly I haven't seen anywhere else in the country. I'm involved with the Tech Councils of North America, so I have firsthand viewpoints into other markets around the country, and I can brag again that Austin really is one of the most galvanized communities around the country. So I'm excited about what that can mean. There's clearly a lot of work to do, but I will also say that we're the only industry organization that has a partnership with a municipality. So the fact that we're working today with the city of Austin, and we've been working for years with this city to really, maybe revise some of the ways that we're thinking about serving the tech community and thinking about how we can bring people who really want to but maybe don't know how to get into the tech sector is really pretty remarkable. So I think Austin has a lot to look forward to. Last point has to do with the life sciences community. We have a very, very bright future, and I would argue in the next decade that will really shift the identity of our market.
Well, the medical school coming to town, having a research facility here, that was probably one of the big gaps in terms of Austin as a whole, in terms of what would be a real economic driver, and that does open up a whole new window. And when you look at, again, Internet of Things and healthcare, so we also have, the city owns Austin Energy, so we're primed to be a test bed for Internet of Things type products and services. But Lynn, we'll close with you in terms of the next chapter and what you see ahead. What most excites you about Austin as a tech community over the next decade?
I think that I would echo everything that Julie said, and the Austin Technology Council really being a force to keep the momentum going strategically. But just on a more of a personal level, I mean, there is such a spirit in Austin right now, and there's a spirit of we can do it and we can grow, and we have growing pains. We absolutely do. We look around, we see the growing pains, but it's going to be a great place to be for a long time to come. And I think that you've got a community that wants to get through the growing pains in a successful manner, build great businesses, and still keep a little bit of what makes Austin very special. So I think it's going to be a great place to be for the next several decades for companies.
Well, we thank you both for coming in today. Thank you for joining us at the RCRatx Studio Lounge in East Austin. We're 1 mile east of downtown, and excited to have both of you guys here, excited about the future of Austin. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.